This Circles of Support and Accountability training video is produced in conjunction with the United States Department of Justice and is part of a larger package on Circles of Support and Accountability project development in the United States. I recognize that this video may be of use to people external to that process, and I should note that there is a PowerPoint that is affiliated with this particular video, which can be found in the documents that are part of that larger Circles of Support and Accountability package on the U.S. Department of Justice website. And you can also find the PowerPoint at the Circles of Support and Accountability tab on my personal website, which is www.robinjwilson.com. Feel free to go there. There are other documents about Circles of Support and Accountability, and there are other videos in this series as well. The topic of this particular video pertains to the agreements that we form in our circles between the core member, or the person who's been released from prison and who is the circled individual, I suppose, and the volunteers. And this is known as a covenant. And I suppose we should probably start off by talking about what that is. So when we think about it as a noun, a covenant is a contract or a compact, an understanding, a pledge, a guarantee, a warrant. There are a number of different sort of synonyms for that, but the idea is that this is kind of like a contract. As a verb, when you covenant with someone, it's like your landlord covenants to repair your property if something goes wrong. It's an undertaking, to give the undertaking, to make a pledge, to promise to do something, to enter into an agreement. So essentially within the Circles of Support and Accountability process, the circle covenants with its core member and vice versa in a sort of, if you do this, we will do that. If you do that, we will do this kind of arrangement. So what is a covenant? So many of us may think of this as a kind of religiously based term, and certainly there is, there's good cause for that, I suppose. The Hebrew word berith, which is the translation of the word covenant, occurs over 280 times in the Old Testament. The English word, that probably derives in some way or another from those understandings from the Bible, means a coming together. The word covenant is often used to denote an agreement that's perhaps a little more solemn than just simply a contract. A contract may be something that two people sign that sort of sets out terms of something, whereas a covenant feels like it's got more to it. And certainly that's what we want to convey within a circle, is that this is a pretty solemn agreement, that we are all working together towards no more victims, we're working towards increased public safety, we're working towards balance and self-determination for our core member, and that these overall are things with a high purpose. It's not simply just a matter of like your cell phone contract that you agree to pay your bill, they agree not to have too many outages in service, and that if either one of you wants to end the contract early, that there are terms associated with that. This seems a bit more routine than something along the lines of, I promise to work as hard as I can with my circle to make sure that I don't victimize children. Perhaps something with a little higher purpose than simply a cell phone contract. Perusing things on the internet, there's a fellow whose name is Frank Damazio, D-A-M-A-Z-I-O, or Z-I-O for you folks up in Canada. And Mr. Damazio writes a lot about kind of spiritual types of things, and actually has a lot to say about covenant relationships. And he identifies 4 elements. The first of those being that a covenant relationship begins with a spiritual act of being knit together. And this being knit together is like being chained to one another, I suppose, in a sense. In nearly every language, friendship is considered to be the union of souls bound together by the band of love. People are sort of have those strongly, intensely, emotionally based relationships with others. A covenant relationship produces a sameness, as though it's like one soul and two bodies. And here I'm speaking from Mr. Damasio's perspective. You're knit together. The strands of your belief is that you need to be tied to one another, that there's an intrinsic purpose for you to be working together on something. There has to be an element of a personal commitment that needs to be reciprocal, and that there's an aspect of mutual respect, and that you're going to be engaging in a process of building each other up as opposed to tearing each other down. The second element of Mr. Damasio's four elements is that a covenant relationship begins and grows by making and keeping that covenant. So as long as you are together and as long as you're working together towards your common goals, that relationship actually becomes self-rewarding, or that there's like a feedback loop, that it gets stronger. The more you do it, the more you can do it, or the more inclined you are to do it. So the purpose of the covenant is to guarantee that the relationship will remain healthy and that it will last. These are the terms under which those two elements can occur. The covenant may be a series of words that are spoken, but that there's a more sort of gut level understanding of what it means to be in that relationship with one another. The covenant is the foundation of your relationship, and it's what allows for the development of a certain amount of permanence and overall stability. The third element is that a covenant relationship begins with a generous soul attitude. And what we're talking about here is that the generous soul gives not only what is valuable and suitable to the relationship, but it's also what makes it honorable, right? So you go into the relationship with the openness and expectation that this will become something greater than the sum of its parts, that the whole will become more than just two people or one person and a number of others, or a group of people coming together, but that coming together is what actually builds everything up. The generous soul attitude causes people to pour out affirmations, encouragements, words of greatness. The idea being that the more you're in it, the more you want to be in it, and the more that it creates that sort of culture of generosity. The fourth element that Mr. Damasio notes in his four elements of a covenant relationship is that a covenant relationship grows and stays healthy as we protect the relationship. So it's not just a matter of sort of talking the talk. You have to walk the walk too. It's one thing to say that you're going to do something. It's another thing to actually follow through on it. And it's the following through on things that actually builds the health of that relationship and encourages the long-term stability of it. So every relationship, has times when things don't go as well as we'd like it to. So there may be some problems, some disruptions. People may stretch certain elements of the understanding. It's to be expected that these sorts of things are going to happen, and that not everybody's perfect all the time. But the idea is that the relationship needs to be protected, that the health of the relationship needs to be protected, and that if you do experience difficulties but stick together, that in and of itself becomes building and inoculating, builds the relationship and inoculates you against further difficulties in the future. So we need to consistently protect the relationship by being faithful to it in our words, our attitudes, and our actions. So that thought, word, and deed aspect, I suppose. When we think about covenants broadly, and just on this last piece that I was just talking about, because that's conflict, right? Whenever we experience conflict, I suppose we have a number of different ways to deal with it. We can cut and run. We can simply try to avoid the conflict, or we can pretend as if it's not there. We can allow other people to deal with the conflict and sort of divest ourselves of the responsibility to engage in it, to engage it. And then there's that idea that we can get in there and get our hands dirty. That the process of actually dealing with conflict helps us to become better at dealing with conflict. It sounds a bit silly, I suppose, but practice makes perfect isn't a popular phrase for no good reason. So this sort of harkens us back to Nils Christie, the late great sociologist from Norway, who is sort of commonly referred to in the circles literature, at least stuff that I've written, because I really like what he has to say about communities and conflict. And what Christie says is that community is made from conflict as much as from cooperation. The capacity to solve conflict is what gives social relations their sinew. So think of it this way. If when you were a child, every time you tripped, your parent was there to catch you before you fell, you would never learn that paying attention to where you're going was an important life skill. It's only the tripping and falling, skinning your knees and getting up and dusting yourself off and getting on with things that actually helps you to deal with that difficulty, which is not paying attention to where you're going. So that conflict between the sort of happy state and the not happy state is being able to manage that and overcome it is what creates the capacity to deal with adversity. And this applies to individuals as much as it does to groups of individuals, like a circle. So dealing with problems in the circle, within the circle, will ultimately strengthen that covenant relationship. Some stuff also found on the internet. David Hicks talks about other elements of a covenant relationship, and he has a number of different covenant perspectives here. The first one is the covenant of affirmation. So there is nothing you have done or will do that will make me stop loving you. So that is sort of affirmation and pledge to be there no matter what. The covenant of availability. I am committed to going beyond myself, to the limits of my time and energy. I will share my knowledge and insights. So this is the aspect of that pledge of I know that I'm a part of this relationship, and I will remain a part of this relationship, and I'll do whatever I can to make sure that it goes forward in a healthy and helpful way. The covenant of openness. I promise to be a more open person, disclosing my feelings, hopes, and longings. The degree to which I do so implies that I cannot make it without you, that I trust you with my problems and dreams, and hope that you will trust me with yours. This is that reciprocity element that is so crucial to a functioning inner circle in a CoSA, that everyone has to understand that they can share with one another, that you can do so in a real and open and genuine fashion, and that others will do the same thing, and that the relationship grows as a consequence of that. The covenant of honesty. I will try to mirror back to you what I'm hearing you say and feel. I will risk speaking the truth in hope that we will grow in friendship. So speaking the truth, sometimes the truth is hard to hear, right? But we want to hear it anyway. And I think there's, certainly within the context of a circle, there's no benefit to pulling punches, to the idea that, you're going to let sleeping dogs lie, or that you're not going to aggressively confront situations that need to be, dealt with. And when I say aggressively confront, I don't mean yelling and screaming. I mean not letting it go. that there needs to be an open and honest discussion about whatever those issues may be. The covenant of sensitivity. I promise to be sensitive to you and to your needs to the best of my ability. I will hear you, see you, anticipate where you are, and draw you out of the pit of discouragement or withdrawal. It costs to be sensitive, right? But sometimes through the eyes of another person, we see ourselves better. So being able to share feedback appropriately and honestly gives you the opportunity to help people see where they're at from your eyes. The covenant of confidentiality, and this is an important one within a circle. I promise to keep confidential the things we share in order to provide an atmosphere of openness. Why is confidentiality so important? Because there can be no friendship without trust. When we trust others, we can open up to friendship and deeper relationship. And I want to just be a little bit clear about this. Within a CoSA, there are often situations where it's quite appropriate to keep things confidential within a circle, but there may be other things that are related to the reason for the circle that may speak to the need to be a little more circumspect and to consider whether or not certain things need to be reported to others. I said earlier that people might be under supervision, and that that might be a part of the process. The covenant of accountability, and this is part of, I guess, what I was just referring to. The covenant of accountability says that accountability is the foundation of any relationship covenant because it recognizes when there's a problem and it gives permission for us to deal with that. Out of accountability flows the acceptance and forgiveness we need. The relationship helps us to work out a plan of action. And it's truly a beautiful thing to be able to say, what happens to me matters to you. And we get that from our core members when they acknowledge that this relationship they have with their circle members really is something that they didn't anticipate. They didn't actually believe that people were going to care enough about them to take the time to sit down and talk with them about important issues in their lives. Building relationships builds community. And that's the big C word for us, right? I mean, community is in many respects what Circles of Support and Accountability is all about. And it's why we call ourselves that. We could easily describe ourselves as kind of communities of support and being affirming, available, open, honest, friendly, caring, accepting, all that sort of stuff. Communities of support and accountability, but really it's that circle idea, the being together, sitting in a room or sitting together, everyone facing one another. That's more than just a grouping of people. It's a much more intense process. And the covenant that we enter into with our core member is the heart and mainstay of who we are, how we relate to one another, how we manage our conflicts and protect protect that relationship and our friendships, which ultimately strengthens our abilities to maintain public safety. So the basic elements of a CoSA covenant are: there is a decision-making process, and this is reached at generally by consensus. The next part is the confidentiality aspect, defining what confidentiality within the circle will mean. What limits are there to that? Are there some things that we cannot keep confidential, things that relate to public safety? In those circumstances, who makes the decision to go beyond the natural confidentiality that the circle maintains? Ultimately, this covenant is oriented towards community safety. And it's not just safety for others, it's also safety for the core member too, and for the members of that circle. And as a top priority, as well as setting out conditions whereby we need to share information with others. So this is sort of overarching community safety element has a lot to do with the other two elements of both decision making and confidentiality. Other elements that are very key to a covenant: communication. How do people discuss things with one another? What's the format? What do we do about phone calls? What do we do about after hours on call types of stuff? It also speaks about the record keeping process. What notes and records are we going to keep, if we're going to keep any at all, and what does that mean in the grand scheme of things? We also talk about the assessment of progress and change. How do we know if the circle is functioning appropriately? Under what circumstances what might we need to tweak certain things? It's not uncommon for many circles projects to have a checklist that looks at sort of dynamic risk or kind of criminogenic needs, and how well the core member is actually progressing. So having some means by which to set that out in the actual covenant is also helpful. We also look at the conformity to the legal requirements. So as I have noted in some of the other videos, most or all of our people who are in circles as core members will be on some sort of supervision in the community, and that typically means that there will be conditions that they have to adhere to over and above whatever the circle might want them to adhere to. And it's not uncommon for the circle to actually write some of those conditions into the covenant. With respect to volunteers, there are certain responsibilities that will be part of this overall covenant. Meeting attendance, showing up, defining support as actual accompaniment. So not just going to the larger circle meetings, but being part of the core member's life in other ways. Giving guidance, being assertive, being available, giving feedback, being there to assist, being accountable. So if we hold the core member to account for his behaviors, we should expect that the core member and our peers in the circle may also hold us accountable for our behavior, right? Nobody's perfect, and we should expect that there are times when others are going to address things to us as well. We expect that our volunteers will be socially appropriate, that they will engage in behaviors in a way that models what we want our core members to ultimately take out of this. So there are some behavioral expectations. Also, there is a commitment to celebrate. So one of the things that we've found over our time in working with circles is that many of the people who become core members, because of their long incarceration, because of the many adverse childhood experiences they may have had, that a lot of them have not actually celebrated a lot in their life. Some of our core members don't remember what it's like to have a happy birthday. Some of our core members don't understand why people put so much stock in holidays and things like that, because those have never been positive experiences for them. One of the things that we found is that when we're helping our core members to become more fundamentally human and normal and average people, that we have to teach them what it's like to succeed and to feel good about those successes and to actually celebrate those sorts of things. So someone who's never been in the community as an adult longer than 6 or 8 months, who makes it to 9 months, that's a cause for celebration. Birthdays, Christmas or Easter, or depending on what faith your person is, it could be Rosh Hashanah, or it could be Hanukkah, or it could be kind of Ramadan, whatever the case may be. There are a number of different kind of religious experiences that need to be validated as well. For core members, again, showing up, being there, being a part of the circle. And this is, sort of typically at first, the meetings will be once weekly. There may be individual contacts with individual circle volunteers going forward. We expect that our core members will share their offense history in its entirety, that they'll talk openly and honestly about the sort of risk vulnerabilities that they have, patterns of behavior that they engaged in before. Sometimes this is called like a relapse cycle or something along those lines. But we want them to tell us what sorts of problems they've had in the past so that we can help them work on those problems going forward. We expect that they will share a copy of their covenant with their probation or parole officer, and that vice versa, that they'll also share the terms of any probation or parole order that they have. We found by experience that having everyone who's involved with the core member be aware of what the playing field is really helps, so that the circle doesn't encourage the core member to engage in behaviors that would get him in trouble with his parole officer or probation officer, and at the same time that there's an open discussion between the circle and the parole or probation officer about how some of the restrictions that may come from the probation order might impact the circle. We want our core members to be active members of the circle process. So they need to pledge within the covenant to be open, frank, truthful. They need to communicate. They need to talk with us. They need to tell their volunteers what's going on in their lives, because that open sharing is what will ultimately help them along the path to that balanced, self-determined lifestyle that we all aspire to. Hopefully, through these sorts of engagements with their circle volunteers and others, they'll become increasingly more mindful of what it means to be in relationships with people, and to understand that there are sometimes subtle, unspoken rules that go along with any relationship in which you may find yourself. Further things for core members: they need to accept personal responsibility for themselves and their behaviors. They need to be really open about new difficulties or re-engagement in old sorts of behaviors. When they're starting to slip, they need to be open and honest about that up front as soon after the difficulty as possible, because it's been our experience that you're way more easily able to deal with a problem when it's small than if you leave it and allow it to fester and it becomes so much bigger that it becomes somewhat unmanageable. We want them to immediately ask for help when they need it. They need to understand that their circle volunteers have pledged to do things with them, and that it's okay to ask for help. I'm going to do this. Can somebody come and help me do that? So they need to be assertive and not just wait for people to offer, that sometimes you need to just come out and say, I need something. Okay? Accepting responsibility. Understanding that you can be held accountable, but you can also hold other people accountable. And this is that sort of reciprocity that exists within circles that we need to model for our core members. They can hold us accountable as much as we can hold them accountable. And ultimately, the biggest part of the covenant relationship for the core member is to pledge to be part of that process, to share their lives as they learn to be more socially appropriate, or to understand what it means to be free in the community, and that their circle volunteers are there to assist them with that, and that process can be a happy one. All in all, circles are about relationships, and sometimes we need to be intentional about what the terms of those relationships are. And in this case, in a circle, we understand that our core member has had difficulties in the past, and that if we're going to help him avoid further difficulties in the future, that this needs to be a highly socially engaging sort of experience. And having a really well-written covenant helps. Within the package that is on the USDOJ website, there is a sample covenant that you can use or you can modify. That's the end of my comments about this topic. I would just remind you that if you want to take a look at the PowerPoint that goes along with this, that it is available both as part of the package on the USDOJ website, or it's available at my personal website, www.robinjwilson.com, under the Circles of Support and Accountability tab. Thank you.